It's no secret that the double hero running back strategy does have a lot of success stories. But I'll tell you this, the amount of praise and glaze, frankly, that I see on a yearly basis about the double hero running back strategy, it's actually kind of embarrassing. This is by no means a one-size-fits-all strategy right here. And today I'm going to go through what the smartest drafters out there are doing about the double hero strategy in 2025 fantasy football. So just make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. So the first thing I want to get into is, if you do not know what the double hero running back strategy is, what the double hero running back strategy is you're going to have two running backs within the first 3 rounds of your fantasy football draft. So anywhere between 1 through 3, you need to get 2 running backs. And typically what it's going to be is you're going to get 2 running backs in the first 2 rounds. You're going to double up in your 1 and 2 pick, getting 2 running backs in those first 2 picks. Most of the time, that's what a double hero running back strategy is. Although some people do consider it to be a double hero if you go with a running back in round 3 or running back in round 4 in certain cases. But here's the truth. Running backs in round 4, you're getting into mid to lower end running back 2 territory most of the time. So that is not going to be a double hero running back strategy. Within the first 3 rounds, typically within the first 2. Now, again, the success stories are very, very real with the double hero running back strategy. I am not here to argue that with you today. In fact, I just went through and gathered all the running backs and wide receivers since 2014 who have had 18 fantasy points per game in a single season. Now, I'm going to go real nice and slow for you so you can just kind of see off the bat. Running backs are already killing the wide receivers as of recent years. And when we get down to the bottom, you'll see running backs just have more that have 18 plus fantasy points per game than wide receivers do on a yearly basis. Now, the important thing to know here is that I left off players who only played 11 games or less. So if you average 20 fantasy points per game and you played 10 games, you did not contribute to this list. And by the way, if I did do that, running backs would still be killing the wide receiver position. So when you get to the bottom, 34 running backs since 2014 have had 18 plus fantasy points per game. Now, if you average that out to one season, it's 3.1 running backs a year with 18.1 fantasy points per game. That's a really good metric right there. And most of the times, those are going to be, constituted as league-winning running backs right there. And then you look at the wide receivers. It's not on the same level. 16 wide receivers since 2014 with 18 plus fantasy points per game. That's an average of 1.5 wide receivers per year with 18 or more fantasy points per game. So again, I'm not arguing that a running back is more likely to give you this unbelievable upside on a per game basis above wide receivers here. In fact, if you want to go with legendary running back status right here, when you're averaging 21 fantasy points per game or more in a half PPR format, 10 running backs have been able to do that since 2014 compared to 2 wide receivers being able to do that since 2014. So running backs are just a better bet if you do want to get that massive upside. And the truth of the matter is, most of the running backs who had 21 fantasy points per game or more, they were drafted inside the first 2 rounds. So again, I'm not arguing that the best running backs who are going to give you the most amount of upside on a yearly basis are always drafted in the first 2 rounds of your fantasy football draft. And it's also no secret, if you hit on both of them, you're going to crush it. You will win your league, or at the very least, cruise to the number 1 seed in your fantasy football playoffs if you hit on both running backs right out of the gate. But here's the flip side of that coin. If you miss, it's gonna crush you. If you draft 2 running backs in the first 2 rounds and one or both of them are outside of the top 15 running backs, you are going to get hammered in your fantasy football league. You will not make the playoffs, and you will probably be at the bottom of the barrel in fantasy football. You're gonna be an embarrassment. It might want to make you cry. Honestly, that's how bad you will end up being in fantasy that year. I'm one for taking risks, though. I'm actually a big risk taker in life and in fantasy football, so I'm all about that idea of taking the risk on the big upside with the running back, but they need to be calculated risks as well. And this is research that I just did this offseason that's extraordinarily important, and it tells a big story on running backs that are typically going to be at the top of every year's draft. So what I did was I singled out Saquon Barkley, in all fairness to this research right here, because I've been worried about his price and what he'll actually do for us in fantasy this year, basically all offseason. So what I did was I gathered all running backs since the 2014 season who have had 350 plus touches in a single season, excluding the NFL playoffs. And I wanted to see what they did the following year. What were their touches like the following year? How many games did they play? What were their touches per game? And what was the running back finish for said player after the 350 plus touch season? Now, what we can take away from here right out of the gate is if you look at like a guy like Ezekiel Elliott, he was the only one who managed back-to-back 350 plus touch seasons in a fantasy football season. He also played 16 games back-to-back in fantasy football. That's pretty much unheard of, because you know what the majority of them are doing? 100% of them lost volume. Again, that's no secret here. You don't see anyone in the green as far as gaining volume the following year. All of them will lose volume. To how much, though? You might ask me. Well, 94.4% of those players dropped below 350 touches. So someone like a DeMarco Murray, who's at the top of this list, right? He had 449 touches in 2014. If he dropped to 350, 360 touches, that's still in really elite territory because he had a monstrous amount of touches in 2014. The majority of these guys are not getting back to 350 touches, even after massive seasons here. That's a big factor, and it's not going to make you a top 3 running back in all likelihood in fantasy football in a particular year. And 88.9% of these guys lost 60 plus touches in the following year. So again, the majority of these running backs are coming off this big season and they're losing touches to a dramatic level. And I think the really interesting part of this, because this really puts it into context here, is, well, let's say that they increase touches per game. You can see that 3 of these guys actually increased touches per game from their big season into the next season. Well, what happened with all of those players who increased touches? 100% of those players who increased touches on a per game basis the following year all went down to injury-shortened seasons. All of them went down. So what you can basically take away from that is this. Either A, this player who had 350 plus touch year, the next year they're either going to lose volume to a big amount, or B, they're going to get injured. You don't want either side of the coin there. The average amount of games played was 10.5 out of all these guys on this list. 27.8% of them missed at least half of the following season. And to put the cherry on top of all of it, 61.1% of these running backs finished as the running back 15 or worse in the following season. It is not a great investment to go after a running back with 350 plus touches the next year after they just did that. And what did we see last year, right? Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, and Kyren Williams all had 350 plus touches in 2024. Well, what's the deal with 2 out of those 3 guys? Bijan Robinson and Saquon Barkley are the top 2 backs going in fantasy football drafts right now at the top of the first round. So typically, it's not going to be a great investment to make to go after one of those 2 running backs. Now, I will say I am not against Bijan Robinson as much as I'm against Saquon because of age and injury history, with Saquon just being on the worst end of that. I'm much more willing to invest in Bijan Robinson than I am in Saquon Barkley. The other problem here with running backs is that they also statistically just get injured far more than wide receivers do in the NFL. And there's obviously a big reason why for this. When is the last time that you saw Ray Lewis, Ryan Clark, Brian Dawkins, John Lynch, some of these elite linebacker / secondary players come down and crack a wide receiver and possibly leave them unconscious on the field? You don't see that anymore because what's happened over the last 20 years or so is that the NFL has penalized those hits, particularly against the wide receiver position. And even worse cases, some of those players have been suspended out of the league who are known as hard-hitting guys. What does that lead the running back position? The running back position is the only position that you can still smoke because none of those guys are considered defenseless players with the ball in their hands right as soon as the play begins. So running backs just get cracked a lot more than wide receivers do in fantasy football. Now again, that's not to say that if everything hits right for the running back, that they will be the better fantasy player than the wide receiver who hits everything right in the same season. If you hit on a running back who has everything hit right for him, it's always going to be the better play in all likelihood than the wide receiver. So how are the smart drafters handling the double hero running back strategy, particularly in 2025? Well, here's the bottom line. You cannot force the double hero running back strategy. You really can't force any particular draft strategy if you want to know the truth. You need to let the draft come to you. That's of utmost importance of every single fantasy football season. But what we're going to go through here in just a second is it is actually more ideal to try in the back half of drafts to utilize the double hero running back strategy. So what I did here was I went through 3 drafts so you did not have to. Real money fantasy football drafts where I did the double hero running back strategy from basically all positions on the board. So the first one we're going to go through is the one I did from pick 5. So you'll see that from pick 5, I managed to grab Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor in the first 2 rounds. Now, you may have a particular feeling on that one. I personally don't love this draft because with Saquon, as I just went through, going to be either losing volume or going to get injured. I don't want it to happen. That's what the research shows us, though, over the last 11 seasons in fantasy football research. So I'm not big on having Saquon Barkley that early on in the draft when I could have, based on the draft board, just taken Jahmyr Gibbs or taken Christian McCaffrey, who are both coming off of either less than 350 touches or an injury of their own. So theoretically, could be a little bit more fresh coming into 2025. Jonathan Taylor on a bad team, this one could go really bad very early. So these 2 guys are a little bit more volatile here. And then I grabbed Marvin Harrison Jr., Cortland Sutton, Jalen Waddle, Emeka Egbuka, the next 4 rounds as my first 4 wide receivers. And I did not go the running back again until Joe Mixon in the 7th round right here. Now again, this is a strategy here that I don't think is going to work very well with these 2 particular backs right here. I, after the draft, came away and said, I don't like that draft very much. I would rather utilize that at a different pick position where I could get different players at different values with this double hero running back strategy. So let's move on to the next draft that I did at the 110. I grabbed Ashton Jeanty and then Derrick Henry at the 10 and 15 spot. Now, with Ashton Jeanty, I don't think that he has RB1 upside this year. I probably should have went with Devon Achane, and the reality was I was trying to get Devon Achane. Thought he would make it back to me, but I got sniped right before I picked Derrick Henry. So if I could go back in time, I would have picked Achane and Derrick Henry as those 2 backs because I see way more upside for those backs hitting 20-plus fantasy points per game than I do with Ashton Jeanty in his rookie season with a bad offensive line and not a great offense in general. But still, nonetheless, I'm way happier with this running back build than I was with the previous one. Because then I was able to get Jaden Daniels in the 3rd round, and I was able to stack him with Deebo Samuel in the 6th round, on top of getting Mike Evans, Jalen Waddle, and Emeka Egbuka as the following 3 wide receivers in this fantasy football draft. So I felt pretty good about this one because of the fact that I had gotten 2 running backs who either are really young coming into the rookie year or basically just built for this because Derrick Henry has proven time and time again to be built for this type of workload. And again, he did not have 350 plus touches last year. So the likelihood that he gets injured theoretically is not as high as it is for Saquon Barkley, who just had 350 plus touches, not including the NFL playoffs again. So I did end up really liking this draft from the 10 spot. And then the last draft that I want to go through here is the draft that I did at the 3 spot. So what I did here was I grabbed Bijan Robinson and then Josh Jacobs. Now, I do think that this could be a potentially lethal starting 2 back right here. I think that these 2 running backs, particularly both have top 5 to top 3 upside. More so with Bijan in the top 3 than with Josh Jacobs, but I think Josh Jacobs still is a top 5 running back in fantasy football in 2025. So I do think that this combination could be really, really deadly to all the other players in this particular league right here. Then I grabbed Josh Allen in the 3rd round, Jamison Williams, Amarian Hampton in the 5th round, which I got at a great value, by the way, Deebo Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Emeka Egbuka. So with these particular drafts, I do want to note this. It's going to be better for you to not draft a quarterback early if you do a double hero running back strategy, because you want to make sure you're getting elite wide receivers as soon as you can after you go with the double hero running back strategy. But this is a best ball league, and I was trying a couple different things, but I was wanting to utilize this double hero running back strategy at all different points of the draft to see how I ended up liking those teams coming out of the draft afterwards. And I did like this one better than I liked the first one, but not as good as I liked the second draft that I showed you guys. So again, the bottom line is this. The double hero running back strategy absolutely does work in certain situations. It is not by any means, though, a one-size-fits-all mentality, and you need to let the draft play out and let the draft come to you. Let certain values come to you. Don't be so rigid that you would go to yourself and say, I'm going to go with Bucky Irving and Christian McCaffrey, 2 kind of volatile players, as my double hero running back strategy. I think that you're probably better off taking a wide receiver in one of those first 2 round picks. So I think that you just need to pay attention to where you're at on the board and utilize your draft picks correctly based on how the draft plays out. Because as I just showed you, I think that the double hero running back strategy is going to be better used at the back of your draft than it will be at the front of your draft. And if you're tired of waiting on your fantasy football league to draft and you just want to draft already in a real money league, then I've got you covered with Underdog because they're offering something awesome right now. Just go down there in the comments. There's a link there, and you can use code FFR to sign up for Underdog, and they'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 in bonus credits. They will literally throw free money your way to go get in on these Underdog drafts. Best Ball Mania is the big one. $25 buy-in. $2 million to first place. Life-changing money you could win having fun playing fantasy football. This is how I won $19,000 playing last year in best ball drafts on Underdog, so you should give yourself a shot at this huge money right now. So let me know if you're using the double hero running back strategy this year, and if you do want to see the best draft strategy for the picks 7, 8, and 9 range in 2025 drafts, click on this video right here.